Here we go. Good morning, everybody. Got to put my mic back on. You got the mic?
It flipped off. No, that's the other one.
There's the mic.
Changing the privacy to public so the whole world can watch this heresy unfold.
Amen.
All right. So greetings, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
We are coming to you live from, changed it up a little bit since last time you were here, huh? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Coming to you live from PB and Java and South Elm Street in Greensboro. And got a nice little group gathered around the table here. No, we don't still have a round table, don't we? Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is our round table teaching. However, today I am going, so is the video good? I want to make sure everything's all set here. Yeah.
Anybody got him on?
You can see me. You can.
I'm letting go of my coffee for now.
Okay,
No.
so this is what I see right there.
Punch this thing anytime.
But is that because of the delay?
It's delayed.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, now I see me from here down.
Yeah.
Okay, there's my head. Okay, all right, we're good to go now.
That's where.
All right.
Okay.
So we are official. This is our continuation of the teaching that I have been doing on Brian Zahn's book, Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God, not to be confused with Jonathan Edwards' wonderful sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So this is, oh, you're doing that. I thought you were saying the book is upside down. So we're in I think it's chapter 6 right now. And the title of Brian's chapter here is Hell and How to Get There. It's kind of interesting, provocative title. I'll sum it up. Basically, it says the way to get to hell is to actually believe the traditional fundamentalist doctrine about hell, and then to put yourself in a position that you're the one to determine who else going there. That'll put you in hell, because as you judge, you shall be judged. So this is a topic that in one way is kind of near and dear to my heart. Not that hell is dear to my heart, but this is a subject that I have a lot of passion about. That would be the word, a lot of passion about. And I have been on a mission. That'd be the word. I've been on a mission for about 3 years now to read everything that I can, to study, to research, to understand this doctrine, where it came from, how it gained prominence in the church, the effect that it has had upon our theology, our relationship with God, and our lives emotionally, mentally, spiritually, the effect that it's had. I am convinced, if you don't know, I'm convinced that the traditional, one of my new favorite words, I got it from Wendy Francisco, fundagelical.
Amen.
It's kind of a blending of the fundamentalist and the evangelical mindset. It's a religion. It's the fundagelical religion of America.
Sounds like a good dessert.
It does, doesn't it? It's kind of fungy. Fundagelical. Okay, so I'll just start out with my opening statement, okay? So I've written a lot of stuff on this, the bedrock foundation upon which the entire fundagelical, retributive God theology system is built is a belief in a hell of eternal torment, where those who do not accept Christ in this life will be punished by God forever. That is the bottom, line belief. And I'm convinced, after several years of pretty intense study, as well as dialogue and discussion and debate and arguments with religious people and seeing how, you bring up this subject and the fangs come out. The fangs come out. There's an intensity. There's I would say almost that religious people are in love with this teaching that God will punish and torment the vast majority of the human race for eternity if they do not fill in the blank. The generic blank is, accept Christ as Lord and Savior. Pray the sinner's prayer, do this, do that, in this lifetime. I believe that is, as I said here, it's the bedrock foundation upon which the entire system is built. The entire system of believing in a God of retributive anger, wrath, justice, holiness, who will punish those who do not somehow figure it all out, work it out. I was telling the group here during breakfast this morning, it hit me as I was driving here today that as much as I talk about this, as much as I write about it, I mean, I'm kind of known as the anti-hell, Facebook theology guy.
No, you're known as the guy that's going to go to hell.
Yes, and Charles, I'm known as the guy who's going to go to hell for teaching against it. And I've been told that before, that God has a special place heated up just for you for teaching that it doesn't exist. I said, that really doesn't scare me. You're telling me I'm going to go to a place that I know is not real.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I ain't scared about that. But it hit me that in all the writing that I've done, all the postings, all the conversation, all the debate discussion, I've only done 2 videos on this. And the entire time I've come out of the cave and began teaching publicly again. I've only taught on this 2 times. I went, wow, that's interesting. So I'm going to really focus on it in a very, I'm putting on this is my teacher hat. I'm going to really try to do some teaching. And it's not going to be all done today, so I'm taking off myself any pressure that I have to get it all done today. I'm looking at maybe 3 weeks right now. That and this is being videoed. Charlie, our videographer here, is using his Mevo, and it's going to be going to YouTube, so we're going to be able to save this. I'm looking at a 3-part mini-series as we're doing this series, Sinners in the Hands of a Loving God. But I'm going to call this, I don't know, I've come up with all kinds of little cute names, but basically just what about hell? And sending hell back to where it belongs. Putting hell in its place, how's that?
What the hell about it?
Yeah. What the hell?
That's right.
Okay, what the hell about hell? So a little bit of where I'm coming from here. Why this is such a big issue for me. Without taking time to testify, as I came out of my darkness and my bordering flirting with atheism, but definitely agnostic, really having walked away from ministry. Yeah, definitely walked away from ministry. Having walked away from Christianity pretty much. Wanting to have nothing to do with Jesus or God or the Bible or any of that. And then I began to be lured by God's goodness back out of the darkness, out of the pig pen. And I realized I had to come to terms with who this God is. And I needed to be reacquainted with him, and I began reconnecting with my faith, and I began reading theology, and I began praying, I began reading my Bible, I began, prayer journaling, and all this kind of just trying to reconnect with the higher power who could restore me to sanity. Some of you recognize the echoes of that from step 2. But I came against this major brick wall, major barrier. If I had to believe in the traditional doctrine of eternal punishment in hell, I could not be a Christian. Bottom line. If being a Christian, a follower of Christ, a believer in God meant that I had to believe in the traditional teaching of eternal conscious torment, that is, how did I write this down? The belief in a hell of eternal torment where those who do not accept Christ in this lifetime will be punished by God for eternity. That's basically it. If I had to believe that, then I would say, forget it. F this stuff. I'm not going to be a Christian. I'll go back to being an atheist. Even though I don't have enough faith for that. Maybe I'll be a Buddhist or something. I cannot be a Christian if that requires me to believe that the God who created the universe, including everybody in it, is the kind of being who would actually either cause or allow the majority of his human creatures to be tortured for eternity for having failed to do something that they couldn't quite get worked out. I just forget it. I can't do it. So but I wanted to be a Christian. I'm reading the Gospels, and I'm really getting into this Jesus person as I'm reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I'm seeing that he's nothing like what I had been taught that he was. And I wasn't willing to just ditch Christianity or ditch Jesus, and I really needed a connection with a higher power who was love and had the power to restore my life. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to deal with this hell thing. And that's where I began. I mean, there's a series of events, but I began being exposed to some teachers. Some of the names you all know really well now. Some of them have actually become my personal friends, which is really, really cool. But I began reading stuff and realizing that which I was repulsed by in my heart, there was a basis for that repulsion. I never really did lay into eternal conscious torment. I never did. I mean, I walked away from that when I was, 12 years old, 13 years old when I left the Roman Catholic Church. I'm done with this. I told my parents, I'm not going to Mass anymore. I'm not going to church. I don't believe in hell. I don't believe in God. I just whatever. And even when I became a Christian, I never embraced the doctrine of hell. I just kind of walked around it. I heard people teaching and I go, that just doesn't sound like Jesus. I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I was theologically trained. I became an ordained evangelical Presbyterian church pastor. I was chairman of the Theology committee. But you know what? Some of you were there back in the 80s and 90s. I never preached a sermon about hell at New Beginnings Church. Never preached about hell. Never did. The elders would say, when are you going to preach about hell? When it freezes over. I can't do it. I cannot do that. Maybe I believe in it because I'm a Christian and I have to, and it's part of the doctrine, but there's just so much cognitive dissonance there in me. I just couldn't go there. Yeah. So I walked around. I walked around the edges of the gates, of hell. I walked around it. And then I remember in 1988 or 86 or something, John Stott, of all people, John Stott, revered Anglican evangelical theologian and pastor in England, he actually came out and said that there is good biblical reason to question the eternality of hell, that believing in eternal conscious torment is not a requirement of the faith. And he introduced me to the idea of what is now called annihilationism. Or the belief that whatever hell is, it's where God basically mercifully euthanizes those who reject him in this life. That's a whole lot better, than being tortured forever. And I really resonated with that because at least it got me away from believing in a God who was going to allow his conscious creatures to be tormented in flames of fire for eternity. I mean, that to me is just so sadistic, it's barbaric. I mean, Genghis Khan is more merciful than that, So I kind of loosely held on to this annihilation or conditional immortality theology, and that carried me through my Christianity. But the big ugly head of hell was always there because, I live in the Bible Belt. It's every fundamentalist church on the corner. You hear it all the time. I was definitely a misfit. As a pastor and a teacher, I was definitely a misfit. I never talked about it. I never let anybody know that I don't really believe that stuff. So then I'm really coming into now, Jesus, I want to know you. I want to be a follower of yours. It was 3 years ago. I want to be a Christian. I want to be a Christ follower. I want God to be the most important thing in my life. I want to be connected with the divine. So I've got to work through this thing. And so this was a big issue. That's all I'm saying. That's why I'm not going to be able to just do this in 45 minutes. This is a big issue. And I knew I had to resolve it. So I started reading some of the Edward Fudge stuff about conditional immortality. I was reading a lot of the annihilationist stuff, and I got hooked up with Greg Boyd. That's where he's at. But then, and this is part of the story, I'm not going to really go there today, but then God just began to really melt my heart towards his mercy and his goodness. And I came to the place, I'm not really an annihilationist, but I can make a really good biblical argument for it. Really good biblical argument for it. But I can also make an even better biblical argument for the fact that Jesus really is the Savior of the world. Mm-hmm. And if he has to annihilate the majority of his creation because they failed to get it right, then Jesus is a failure and Satan wins. And his mercy doesn't endure forever if he puts people out of existence to punish them for failing to have come to terms with him. So my heart was won over, I think, by the goodness of God to a very strong hope / belief, very strong hope. And Brad Jersek says, I'm a hopeful universalist, he said, but that's like 98%. And I'm holding out maybe 1% that maybe I'm wrong, because I'm not going to be dogmatic, because dogmatism is fundamentalist. It's that mindset, I got it figured out, I know. We don't know, none of us have died. None of us know, okay? We're leaning heavily one direction, but I'm leaning heavily towards the mercy and the goodness of God, and the character and the nature of God is revealed by Jesus. So my heart got won over to that which I now teach and preach and talk about all the time. And that's why the Facebook group Posse of Online Spiritual Misfits says in the description that we have a very strong leaning towards ultimate reconciliation or Christian universalism. But you don't have to sign the dotted line to be a member of the church. But that is where we're coming from. So, what about hell? We're going to talk about it for a couple weeks. And I'm not really going to talk a whole lot from Brian's book because I've done as much research as anybody on this. So this is coming from me and my research. At the end, I do want to address how Brian approaches this. I'm going to talk about what I agree with and some things I disagree with in Brian's. But I encourage everybody to read that chapter. It's excellent. It's really, really, really good. And Brian presents as good a case argument for the Eastern Orthodox view as anything I've ever read. That's where he's coming from, the patristic universalist fathers, pretty much. So, the traditional popular doctrine of the teaching that 90+% of evangelical, fundagelical Christians believe is the ultimate in the us-them theology. Us versus them. If you are us, if you're a Christian, when you die, you immediately get a mansion in heaven where you live in eternal bliss forever and ever. What's the basis of that? Is it based on how you lived? Is it based on how you loved? Is it based on following Jesus, obeying Jesus? No, it's based on whether or not you signed a card or prayed a prayer. That's what it's based on. You got in, you got your ticket, you go to heaven when you die, and everybody else goes to hell. Lucky us. How wonderful that is for us, and how terrible that is for everybody else. So it's the ultimate us versus them. And it is, I mean, I'm kind of diagnosing what's wrong with contemporary American Christianity. All Christians go to heaven, and all non-Christians will be sent to hell to be tormented by God forever. Isn't that a wonderful religion? Isn't that a wonderful belief system? It is if you're one of the us. But then you have to narrow down and determine who is the us. You can say, well, all Christians go to heaven when they die. Yeah, but let's define what we really mean by a Christian. Are you just a Christian in name only? Are you really, and then that depends on what group you're part of. It's group think. If you're this kind of Christian, then you have to do this, and not do that. And if you do this, it's this, and not that. When you die, you'll get to go to heaven. You won't burn in hell for eternity. And that enables, and Gary, right? Was talking today about a young man who was in a religious family, and he came home one day with a tattoo in his arm. And he was told by his religious father that he is now, there's nothing he can do about it. He has signed his ticket to hell. He is damned, condemned, because the Bible clearly says back there in Leviticus that if you do this, then you're cursed, an abomination, so you're going to go to hell. And that young man has lived that prophecy out because he believed it. Tragic.
What the tattoo was.
It was the tattoo, it was a Celtic cross, of all things. It was, St. Patrick of Ireland cross. The doctrine is abominable, it's horrible. Okay, calm down, Lee. So they, whoever they are, whoever the group is, they determine the parameters of what it really means, what you have to do. And this becomes, and it is, people, this becomes the ultimate power system of control based on fear. It's a fear-driven control system. And it is extremely effective because you can control people's behavior. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about history as I do this teaching. The Roman Empire, as they merged with the church, they realized that they could use this teaching of hell to control the masses. I have reams of quotes by people going back, all the way back early centuries, where they say that we came, even the Greeks before Christ with their pagan beliefs about hell and torment, said that these are all fables and myths, but we use them to control the masses. Well, guess what? You figure out that if you tell people, if you don't do what we say, you're going to be tormented and tortured forever and ever and ever. If you're naive enough to believe that, then they have total control of your life. And they can take your money. Okay? It really is about money in the end. It's all about them. The Catholic Church, they just turned that into a brilliant science, the way they controlled the people and extorted their money.
Indulgences.
And that's part of what the Reformation, 500-year anniversary Reformation, is a week away. And that is what Martin Luther rose up against, was the abomination of indulgences, and how the Catholic Church used that if you pay us enough money, we have the power, twisting Scripture, we have the power to forgive you your sin, and we can get you out of purgatory, and we can go directly to the Virgin Mary, and we can probably get you out of hell even if you do what we say, but it's going to cost you money, 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 money.
Sounds pharmaceutical.
Yeah. It does. So it's the ultimate system of fear and greed to control the masses, to extort their money. And I want to spend some time talking about this, deconstructing this teaching about hell. And I'm going to be very detailed. I mean, I've been studying this for years now. So my challenge is, how do I narrow this down without going all over the place? So I use an outline. Outlines sometimes help you organize your thoughts. So things that I want to address. Is this really what the Bible teaches? Number two, if not, then where did this come from? Will that be helpful to know how did this become the prevalent belief system of our culture, of our religious culture? This is the predominant belief system. It influences everything that we believe, everything we think. I mean, it's the DNA of evangelicalism. It is. You take that away, the whole house falls. That's why they defend it so passionately. You take this away, the whole house falls. So don't you dare take away my retributive, angry God who's going to send people to hell, because if you take that away, then, and you hear it all the time, you take this away, then why even be a Christian? I hear that every day. Well, you take this away, then people can just go do whatever they want to do. Well, they do it anyhow, but that's a moot point. You take this away, though, and why did Jesus even come? I hear that all the time. What did Jesus die for if he didn't die to get us out of hell? We kind of covered that when we did a couple of weeks on penal substitutionary. So number two is, if this isn't what the Bible teaches, then where did it come from? I'm looking forward to getting into that. Number three, this will probably be our third week. How do we deal with some of those scripture passages that have been used to promote and support this belief? For example, the rich man and Lazarus. I hear that about every other day. What about the rich man and Lazarus? What about John 3:16? What about John 3:16? We were talking about that this morning during breakfast. First, let me share just some thoughts, some beliefs. What is wrong with this teaching? A lot of things are wrong with it. The first thing that is wrong with it is not what is taught in the Bible. And I'm going to demonstrate that. And I'm going to take some time to do it properly, I hope. It is not what the Bible teaches, contrary to what you may have been led to believe as you live in the matrix of religion. This is not what the Bible teaches. It's not even close to what the Bible doesn't teach anything like what you have been taught to believe. Nothing. Number two, it is morally and philosophically repugnant. I like that word. It's repugnant. Any educated, knowledgeable person with any morals or any ethics about them at all knows that it is not cool to keep people alive and torture them endlessly.
We even have rules of war.
We have rules of war. We do have rules of war. If any human being, any military leader, any dictator, president, whatever, came anywhere close to doing what we think God will do with the majority of his creatures for eternity, they would be tried in The Hague for war crimes. Absolutely. If any parent took parenting ideas from what they believe the Bible teaches about how God deals with his children, they would be arrested for child abuse. Okay, Johnny, you're going to obey me, and you're going to love me, and if not, I'm going to put you in the oven, and I'm going to turn it up to 500 degrees. But here's the thing, that kid will eventually die. But what we teach about God is that he's going to put you in his oven, and he's going to turn it up, and he's going to do some little thing where he makes you live forever, even though you have now a resurrected body. And they will teach. Tertullian taught this. I'll talk about Tertullian. What a swell guy. That one reason we have resurrected bodies is so that we can feel the torments of the fire of hell for eternity. It's not just our souls that are going to be tormented, it's our bodies are going to be placed in fire forever and ever and ever, where they'll be screaming and wailing, but there'll be no relief, ever. Now, if any parent came anywhere close to doing that, they would be in prison. There would be a moral outrage. It'd be all over CNN. And yet we just glibly accept that that is who our God, that we say is unconditional love. That's what he will do to the majority of his human creation. That is morally repugnant. It's insane. People, wake up. I mean, I go back to the Matrix. Unplug yourself. Take the red pill. Wake up. You're living in a make-believe, hellish, nightmarish world. Your belief system is hellish, literally, nightmarish. So, it's not taught in the Bible. It is morally and philosophically repugnant. I could go on and on about how it's philosophically repugnant. I mean, just the idea of being eternally punished for temporal crime is philosophically untenable. Doesn't even make sense. How do you, if God is just, well, God's just, so he's going to torture you for hell in eternity to pay for the fact that you failed to accept Christ during your 70 years on earth. Just? What the hell is just about that? An eternal punishment for a limited temporal crime. It just doesn't even make sense. Number 3, it is a total, this is a big one here. Everybody say big. All right. It is a total contradiction to the character and nature of God as revealed to us by Jesus, who is the exact image and the perfect representation of the character and nature of God. I mean, that's what I teach about all the time. Jesus came to reveal the Father. No one has ever seen God at any time but the one and only who is in the bosom of the Father. He has revealed him. And what Jesus has revealed is totally polar opposite, contrary to the God as presented, believed in, worshiped, feared in religious Christianity. Total opposite. And little mind thing I do is I try to picture, a little bracelet, what would Jesus do? Can I picture Jesus? Now let's just go back. Okay, so how do we picture Jesus? The Gospels. Read the Gospels. That Jesus we're talking about. Remember that one? The one who said, suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not. The one who wraps his arms around lepers and says, be healed. I have compassion upon you. The one who says to the woman taken in adultery, neither do I condemn you. Go sin no more. I mean, that's the Jesus we're talking. Can you picture that Jesus being the one who says, go to hell and burn for eternity because you failed to pray to me and ask me into your heart while you were alive? Even though you may have lived in Bangladesh and never even heard of who he is, but you didn't do it. You didn't cross the T, you didn't dot the I, you didn't get it right, so burn, 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 and be tormented forever. It is a total contradiction to the character and nature of God, who Jesus is the perfect image and exact representation of. And here's a big one. It makes Jesus, i.e. God, a total hypocrite. Because he is the one who commanded that we love and forgive our enemies. This right here should cause some discombobulation in your belief system. Jesus, the one who commanded that we love and forgive our enemies, and yet he is going to keep his enemies alive for eternity to be punished forever. That makes us more loving and merciful than God. That's blasphemy. I am more merciful than God. I'm more compassionate than God. I forgive my enemies. I love them. But God is going to torture his forever. And yet, Corinthians says that love keeps no record of wrongs. And his mercy endures forever. So, I got that out of my system. Those are basically some of the bullet points, problems that I have with this teaching, and why I came to the conclusion that if this is true, if this is what I have to believe, then forget about being a Christian. I can't do it. Because I would have to sacrifice my morals, my ethics, my intelligence. I'd have to become a horrible person to believe this. I hear a voice. Are you saying that if I believe this, I'm a horrible person? No, you believe a horrible thing. You believe a horrible thing. So let's talk about the biblical evidence for the belief in eternal conscious torment. Okay, we're done. No, I'll go a little further. Let's talk about the biblical evidence, or the lack thereof, for the traditional fundagelical belief about hell. So let's start with the Old Testament. Let's start with Genesis, and we're going to go all the way from Genesis to Malachi, and I'm going to show you every single verse. It's going to take maybe I'm going to show you every single verse from Genesis to Malachi where it talks about hell as being a place of eternal torment and punishment for those who die without having accepted Jesus in their hearts. Okay, I'm looking. Yep. Malachi. Yep, okay. And I'm being a little funny here. The fact of the matter, not my opinion, the fact of the matter is that this is never mentioned in the Old Testament ever at all. Never. From Genesis to Malachi, there is nothing mentioned about those who do not, of course it doesn't say except Jesus, those who do not get things right with God in this lifetime are going to be kept alive to be punished forever. There's not even a hint of it. Now, if this were true, if it were true that the fate of the human race is that they are going to be punished for eternity for their sins, that they're going to be kept alive forever to be punished by God in eternity in fiery flames of hell for their sins, don't you think that God, it would have been nice of him, it would have been fair of him to at least have given us a heads up about that somewhere in the Bible? To make it explicitly clear. I mean, why did he not say to Adam and Eve, if you eat from that tree, you're going to go to hell? No, what did he say? You're going to die. He didn't say you're going to go to hell. I mean, why? It was like a secret. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. The Old Testament is silent about it. Here's another thing, and Brian does deal with this quite a bit in this book. The Hebrew Scriptures are basically silent on anything about the afterlife. That's a fact. The Old Testament hardly ever talks about what happens after you die. Their focus was on this life. That's a fact. And that is, this is a quote from Brian. There's a quote right here. The Hebrews were conspicuous in having almost no afterlife theology. And that caused them to stand out like a sore thumb from the surrounding counterparts. The Egyptians, from which Israel came out, in Egypt for 400 years, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I mean, that's the basis of their whole spiritual theology. The empire, the pyramids were all built. It was all about the afterlife. They concocted this elaborate belief system about what happens to you when you die. That was their belief system. And the Hebrews came out of that, and they never talked about the afterlife. Isn't that interesting? Their focus, the focus of the prophets and the Mosaic Law, was all about living righteously and justly and honoring God, the worship of God, and practicing justice among your brothers in this life. The rewards were in this life. I'm not saying that there is no after. I'm just saying the Old Testament never even dealt with it. It was not there. It was not there. So, never mentioned in the Old Testament. It was never mentioned by Paul. Think about this. Paul wrote 1/3 of the New Testament. If this was what they say that it is, don't you think Paul would have made this a central point of his theology? He never did. There's possibly one scripture that can be used. You can make it say this, but it's one scripture in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. But it can also mean, it can be interpreted other ways. You don't take one scripture and say, this supports the belief in eternal conscious torment, which is the whole foundation and bedrock of our theology. Paul, here's an interesting point. Paul spent 3 years with the Ephesians, and he taught them every day. He was in their synagogues, teaching. And as he was leaving, getting ready to leave, he said, I was with you daily, and I taught you, and I shared with you the whole counsel of God. The entire counsel. He said, I gave it all to you. But he left out one little minor thing which fundagelical religion has built their entire house on, which is this belief on something that's not even found in the Bible. And you're probably thinking, where did it come? Yeah, we'll deal with that. Where did it come from? It didn't come from the Bible. Okay? Here's another one. The book of Acts. The book of Acts gives us eyewitness, first-hand account of the early church in the first 4 or 5 decades of the early church. It shows us what they taught, how they lived, what they preached. We have 19 separate sermons or sermon fragments recorded in the book of Acts. 19. None of them ever talk about the afterlife or eternal torture in hell. It was never, Paul never mentioned it. John didn't preach it. Peter didn't preach it. Stephen wasn't mentioned in his sermons. All the sermons in the book of Acts that we have a record of, the subject never came up. Is that not, I mean, should that not wake people up? And I shared this with people, and I get in discussions, and I say, well, what do you do with it? Well, Jesus talked about it. Aha! Jesus talked about hell more than he talked about heaven or anything else. Jesus was a hellfire preacher. Come on. And that is a prevalent belief, that Jesus the hellfires. I have a whole teaching that I'm not going to take the time, because this is an overview today, basically. But my teaching is, was Jesus really a hellfire preacher? That's going to be next week. That's going to be next week. They say Jesus talked about hell more than he talked about heaven, more than anything else. I say, it's repeated all the time. Jesus talked about hell 2 times more than, really? Are you saying that because you know that? Are you saying that because you actually did the research and counted the instances? Or are you saying that, are you parroting something that was handed down to you that somebody else told you? Okay? And that is what they're doing. They're parroting what was said over and over. And it's just repeated over and over and over and over again. I see it every day. So, I'm going to deal with some of the things that, because we got to talk about what Jesus taught. Because that is where, so this is the scenario. It was never mentioned in the Old Testament. Wasn't even an issue. Didn't even talk about the afterlife. Wasn't even on the radar. Wasn't even on the radar. And then Jesus appears. Jesus appears in the first century. And all of a sudden, Jesus begins warning people about damnation and hellfire. And he's talking about, you're going to go to hell, and you're going to go to hell, and you're going to go to hell, and the whole world's going to go to hell, and if you don't do this, then you're going to go. And Jesus, and they really, Jesus is like the ultimate West Bureau Baptist Church guy with the signs and the placards. God hates fags, burn in hell. That's their version of Jesus.
Wait, there's something wrong with that?
Yeah, there is true. I'll talk to you after. Okay. Well, we'll talk after service. Okay. So we have to deal with what did Jesus really talk about, because they are taking things that Jesus said, and based on their presupposition, based on their retributive God, angry God, lenses through which they look at everything, they are actually seeing and hearing and believing that Jesus is talking about sending people to hell. Jesus is talking about something, but let's figure out what it is that he was talking about. And to do that, we have to put on our thinking caps, and we have to go back in time and place ourselves in first century Israel and hear what Jesus was saying with first century culturally relevant ears, and not hear it 2,000 years later after hundreds and hundreds of years of pagan influence into the Roman Catholic Church, which I'll be talking about. And then incorporating all of the paganism, all of the traditions of men, all of the religious ideas, all of the myths and fables, all of the Danteism, all of the literature from the Dark Ages, and we take all of that and we compress that, and then we export that back into the Bible. And when Jesus uses the word Gehenna, we translate that, the word hell, which carries all of that religious baggage, and we think that's what Jesus is talking about. That's what happened. But you have to know 2,000 years of history to really be able to understand that. Because we're putting all of these things that we have accumulated along the way, and we're compressing them into this word that we came up with in the English language called hell, which does not exist in the Bible. Okay, hold on. I'll read something to you. The word hell does not exist in the Bible. Fact. It could not have existed in the Bible. Why? Because it didn't exist. I quote from the Concise Dictionary of Etymology by R. Barnhart, page 348.
Oh, I thought it was 346.
Yeah, you're wrong. The modern English, this isn't a religious book, this is not a theology, this isn't written from some New Age heretic universalist. This is a book on the origin of words. From the Concise Dictionary of Etymology, page 348 by R. Barnhart. The modern English word hell is derived from the Old English H-E-L or H-E-L-L-E, originated around AD 725. The word hell first appeared in the human race 725. During the Dark Ages, I could go there, to refer to the netherworld of the dead, which was a Greek and Egyptian concept. It wasn't Christian. It was not Christian. It was not Hebrew. So the modern English word hell is derived from the Old English hell, originated about AD 725 during the Dark Ages to refer to the netherworld of the dead. The word, listen to this, the word was originally used to transfer a pagan concept to Christian theology and its vocabulary. Did you hear that? I got that in big caps. I'm going to say it again. This is not coming from somebody with a theological bone to pick. This is talking about where do words come from. The word was originally used or coined to transfer a pagan concept from Babylonian and Egyptian and Greek paganism to transfer, great word, transfer a pagan concept into Christian theology and its vocabulary. The English word hell has been theorized as being derived from the Old Norse pagan mythology, including a being named Hel who is described as ruling over an underworld location of the same name. It doesn't come from Christianity, people. Okay? Drop mic. It doesn't come from Christianity.
What does it mean again to refer to the?
Here. Okay? I think that's important. Okay? That's important, and I wish I could shout that from the mountaintops. Take out a full-page ad on the New York Times or something. I don't know. The English word hell is not in the Bible. It's not Hebrew. It's not Christian.
It's in my Bible.
It is in your Bible. We're going to talk about that, brother. We're going to talk about that. Hallelujah.
I want to say something.
Okay.
Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
But in between that, he created hell.
No,
he
it doesn't
didn't.
say
It
that.
doesn't say that. Great point.
And the Bible's truth. It doesn't
Yes.
say he created hell or a place of
Right.
torment.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
That's because man hadn't sinned yet.
So when did God create hell? I mean, I said that that this belief is morally repugnant and philosophically it's untenable. Here's I got to avoid the temptation to really go too deep here, but here's just I throw this at people and it makes their heads go boing, and then they throw up their cognitive dissonance blinders and go, what about John 3:16? So evangelical theology, Christian theology teaches that God is by very nature, he is omnipresent. The omnipresence of God, that means he exists in all places at all times, forever and ever. There's no place in the universe that God does not exist. Okay, so we got that, right? Okay, premise 1, God is omnipresent. Okay, premise 2, hell is by definition a place where God is absent. God does not exist. It's the absence of God. You talk to evangelicals. God is absent in hell. It's the place of horrible torment because God is not there. Whoa, wait a minute now. What about premise number 1? God is everywhere. So how can there be a place called hell where God is not if God is everywhere?
It's just a mystery. Leave it alone.
Leave it alone, that's it. And that is the cognitive dissonance kicking in. It's a mystery. I mean, I love playing with people like that. So hell is a place where God does not exist. He is absent. It is the emptiness of God, and yet God is everywhere. So if God is everywhere, then God is also in hell. And it can't be the absence of God, which is kind of the Eastern Orthodox. It's,
there, right? That's
huh?
where he went and got the keys.
What's that?
So he can go there, right? That's where he went and got the keys.
Yeah.
Where
Okay.
do you think that came from?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so Jesus talked about Gehenna. He did not talk about hell. Okay? We're going to take next week, the whole thing is going to be about Gehenna and what Jesus really taught. It's going to be really important teaching. So I'm not going to go there right now. I'm not going to dive headfirst into that. But I do want to talk about how did Gehenna become associated with this fundagelical idea of a place of eternal torment, which we call hell, which didn't even have a word to it until 725 AD. The first time Gehenna was ever tied to this idea of a place of afterlife torture was around 150. Okay, this is your history lesson for the day. The first time the idea of hell was ever tied to what Jesus taught about Gehenna was around 150 AD by Justin Martyr. Okay? It did seep into the early church. I'm not saying that the early church had no belief in eternal conscious torment. I'm showing you where it came, okay? So Justin Martyr, around 150, the first time it appears in Christian literature, first time, First time it appears in Christian literature is about 150 AD in the writings of one of the early church fathers, Justin Martyr, and he refers to Gehenna as a place of punishment, which will be fiery torture punishment for the wicked. However, Justin Martyr never gives that Gehenna the status of being an endless place, eternal place. It could, hold on one second. It could be a temporary place of punishment, of refining, of burning, of judgment, but he never attributed it to eternal torment. But it was punishment and it was fire. But the important thing is that he connected that idea with Jesus' teaching about Gehenna for the first time. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to go back to the refining of like going through the spiritual flame to be refined of your evil and everything going to hell.
We're gonna talk about that.
No, I figured like that's where like the idea
It
of
is.
hell came from.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
So,
and it's where purgatory comes from, the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. So now, okay, so the first mention of it was Justin Martyr around 150, where he associates Gehenna. Jesus talked about Gehenna. We're going to talk about what that was, but he associated Jesus' teaching about Gehenna with a place of afterlife punishment. It wasn't until around 220 AD. Some of you will find this boring. I find it important. It wasn't until 220 AD that this guy named Tertullian posited the idea that this hell, which he now is referring to as Gehenna, was a place of everlasting punishment, where God would keep people alive forever and ever and ever in order to be punished and tormented. That's the first time it ever appeared in Christian history, was 220 AD. Okay. We're going to talk about him in a minute, okay? So I just want to put that out there, okay? And I'm going to go back to this. So we're still dealing with what the Bible teaches or doesn't teach about hell. So Emily, Jesus taught about hell more than anything else, right? Okay, that's what you said. Somebody said, and I told you I was going to respond to this. I'm going to kind of respond to that right now, but next week I'm going to really respond to it. But if in fact this teaching which is so prevalent and foundational, is true, it would be all over the Bible. It would be all through the Bible. And they say that it is. They say that it is, if you talk to infernalists, I mean, the way they read the Bible is on every page. But it's not. But let's just put it in context, in perspective, okay? I want to put it in perspective. The version of the Bible that has the most mentions of the English word hell, which shouldn't even be there. It was a word that was used to transfer pagan concepts into Christian literature and theology. So by the time the King James Bible comes along, the church is steeped in this theology. So they grab this English word and they translate 3 different Greek words and 1 Hebrew word, when they should have just put the Greek word or the Hebrew word in there. We'll talk about those words. They replaced it with the word hell. They imported this word hell with all of its baggage that came from the Middle Ages and from Dante's Inferno and from some of the paintings of the Dark Ages. And they took this word and they replaced the words Sheol, Hades, Tartarus, and Gehenna with this English word hell with all of its baggage and connotations and associations. But the most frequently that word hell appears in the Bible is the King James Bible. Imagine that. The King James Bible, where it appears 31 times. Okay? So let's give them, let's say it really is what they say it is. So God who orchestrated the Bible, he's trying to communicate to the human race. It's mentioned 31 times. But let me just mention this. The more modern translations have it 14 times. Okay?
That's the reason you need the King James.
Yes, sir, brother. You need the King James, the real Word of God, the one Jesus used,
Amen.
the one Paul used.
Hallelujah.
Right, that's right. Paul's Bible, the King James version, which by the way was authorized by King James. That's why it's called the King. King James was not a godly Christian man. He was a wicked tyrant.
Shut your mouth.
And he hired these theologians and interpreters and translators to come up with a Bible that basically affirms the fact that I am the King and I am the Lord and you have to obey me. I mean, there's a lot of that written in the King James Bible. His persuasion. So the more recent, more accurate translations have the word hell. I suggest it shouldn't even be in the Bible, and there are many translations now. Young's literal translation, the word does not even appear. Doesn't appear, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't. That's my point. It shouldn't.
What are the actual translations of Sheol and Hades?
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
That's the next page. This is a methodical teaching. So 14, I just want you to, 14 times the English word hell appears in the New Living, in the ESV, English Standard Version, in the New, yeah, I think maybe 17 times in the NIV. However, the word Father appears 944 times. Okay? The word heaven appears 644 times. Hell, 14, heaven, 644 times. The word sin, 441 times. The word death, 456. The word judgment, 344. The word hell, 14. I mean, if we had a bar graph, can you visualize it? Hell. And yet that is the doctrine that the church has chosen to make the foundation of their theology. People, there's something wrong with this picture. Now, so how do they say, well, hell is all through the Bible? Well, if you make the wrong connection and you believe that every time it mentions death, it's really talking about hell, or every time it mentions judgment, it's really talking about hell, or in the New Testament, whatever words like perish is really talking about hell. John 3:16, whoever doesn't believe in him is going to perish. It means he's going to go to hell, brother, for eternity. Now, that perish doesn't mean that, I'm sorry. Perish means perish. Death, the wages of sin is death. You're going to go to hell forever and be burned and kept alive forever, because that's what it says. The wages of sin is death. Wake up. Death means death. That's not being kept alive for eternity so you can be tortured in fire. How do you do that? How do you get that and call yourself an intelligent human being? You've been bamboozled. You've been brainwashed. You've been drinking some really sick Kool-Aid for a long time. Okay, so are y'all still tracking with me?
Yeah.
Okay, it's been an hour
But we
almost.
gotta go.
Okay. Oh, but I've 14.
No, I mean, us too, we gotta go.
You got to, did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. So I only have 14 more pages of notes. I've gone through 3. I've got 14 more. So I'll go through this real quick. Still doing history lesson. Historical facts. This is all recorded, so you can go back and watch it and take your notes. For the first 500 years, and all of this is documented. I can provide references and documentation for all of this. For the first 500 years of Christianity, eternal conscious torment was not the prevailing view. It was not. It was a minority position held by people like Tertullian, Justin Martyr, St. Augustine of Hippo. It was not the prevalent view. It's not what the majority of the church believed. As a matter of fact, from 170 AD to 430 AD, for 4 centuries, there were 6 prevailing theological schools in the known world. 6 theology schools, seminaries, whatever. Of those 6, one of them, the school in Carthage, Africa, taught eternal conscious torment. The other 5 were some flavor of ultimate reconciliation, universalism. There's a book written by a guy named Hanson about that thick. Title of it is Universalism, the Prevailing Doctrine of the Christian Church for the First 500 Years. It is so documented, it's unbelievable. Okay, that's a fact. The only school that taught eternal conscious torment was in Carthage, Africa. Guess who the head bishop was? Tertullian! Old Turdy.
Oh.
Okay, so you want to read about a really nasty dude? Google Tertullian.
Oh, really?
And read some of the stuff that he wrote. That man was he was seething with vengeance and rage and hatred. I read his stuff. He talks about heaven being a place where you're going to be able to watch. You're going to be able to look into hell and watch your enemies being tormented by fire, and you'll be filled with an eternal glee and joy. That'll be part of the joy of heaven will be watching your enemies being tortured forever. He taught that. I mean, he waxed eloquent talking about it. It was like he was just, you could see the smile on his face and the saliva dripping from his lips as he fantasized. Now, this was a time when Christians were being horribly persecuted. This is a time when they were being brought into the Roman Colosseum and set on fire and eaten by animals. And he talked about, he said that those who sent the lions and the tigers, he said, they will be eaten by animals, but they'll never die forever and ever, and we'll watch them burn. Ha, 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 ha. That was Tertullian. He had an anger issue. But he was also the head of the School of Theology. And he was a very prominent and very influential theologian. He's one of the fathers of the faith. He is called the Latin father of the faith.
Tertullian?
Tertullian.
Tertullian?
Tertullian. He is the Latin church father, and he was the primary influence of this guy who came about 200 years later named Augustine of Hippo. Okay? Also from that area in Egypt. Okay? So we have this one pocket of infernalists who have a retributive God who's going to punish the world, he's going to torment people forever, and then you have 5 other schools of theology led by people like Origen and Saint Clement and I'm blanking out the names right now, but the early church fathers, the patristic fathers, and they taught something entirely different. Okay, so here's what happened historically. I'm going to probably have to end on this. Around 482, so you got that division? You got Carthage with Tertullian, and now Augustine and Hippo, and and they're associated with, I mean, they're Latin. They don't even speak Greek. That's an important thing. Augustine did not speak Greek, and he butchered the Greek language, and we have Augustine, a whole different teaching, but we have Augustine to blame for taking a Greek word, which meant an era or an epoch, and he mistranslated it as eternity, eternal. And he did the same thing with the word for chastisement, for correction. He called it punishment. We come up with this concept of everlasting punishment, which is not in the original Greek language. That was Augustine's contribution to Christianity. Okay? Now, that's a whole different teaching. And then in 482 AD, I'm done with the history lesson. 482 AD, this guy named Justinian, Emperor Justinian, rises to power as the Roman emperor. Justinian purged, that he wanted to consolidate power because the Roman Empire was scattered and split and churches were doing different things, and he consolidated power militarily, and he brought everything under his control. It was a great consolidation of the 5th century when things changed. He purged the church of its Eastern influence. He took the writings of Origen and Clement and others, and he burned them. That's what you do when the new sheriff is in town. He gets rid of everything from the old sheriff. So a lot of the writings we have from the patristic fathers don't even exist. We have fragments, and we're able to piece things together and say, wow, they taught that. And we have people like Brad Jersak, scholars who are willing to do the work and pull it together. So we see a whole different version of Christianity emerge that the majority of the church believed prior to this consolidation. He purged the church of its Eastern influence. He burned most of their writings. And under his rule, very important, under his rule, he instituted the doctrine of eternal conscious torment as taught by Tertullian and Augustine as the official doctrine of the now Roman Catholic Church. Sealed. That's when it happened. And then after that, we have Dante, who wrote his 3-volume fantasy epic poem. 1/3 of it was the Inferno with all of these images that came out of his crazy imagination, which the church adopted and said, yes, this is a picture of hell. And then we have pictures of people being tormented by demons and pitchforks. You wonder where the pitchfork came from? Dante. And then John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, and then some of the artists painted these horrendous pictures of people being tortured in hell. And that filled the religious imagination of people during the Dark Ages. I wonder why it's called the Dark Ages. And the Catholic Church used that. They used that to instill fear into the populace for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and to exert total control over the people. That is where the doctrine of hell comes from.
Then the far side and Larson.
What's that?
The far side.
Yeah.
And Larson.
So in Christianity,
Yes. They added to it.
Yeah.
so
Okay.
Christianity is completely based on fear now, while
Yes.
saying out of its mouth that God is
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why we're in such a sad state. So I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to answer. I said the next page. I'm not going to take time to do this. The 4 words translated hell, which should have remained what they were, Sheol, in the Old Testament. The King James almost every time has the word Sheol translated as hell. Okay? It never should have been. Sheol is a Hebrew word which means the place for the dead. That's all it means. It's the grave or the place of the dead. And it's all through the Psalms. David talks about those who go down to Sheol. He's talking about those who die. It's a euphemism for dying, for dead. But David, okay, and those who say that hell is a place where God is absent, then why does David say 139, even if I go into Sheol, you are there with me? So God goes into hell because it's death. Then we have the word Hades. Hades, it's important to know what Sheol is because Hades is the Greek translation of the word Sheol. It's the same thing. It means it's the place of the dead. That's what it is. However, can you just 5 more minutes? Can you hang with me?
Yeah.
All right. However, okay, well, Hades ends up having a whole lot different connotation and meaning than just a place of the dead. For example, the story of Lazarus and the rich man. What about Lazarus and the rich man? Well, we're going to get there. It's 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away, I'm planning on Lazarus and the rich man and the sheep and the goats. Okay? Because those are the 2 favorite stories people use to say, well, the Bible, clearly, Jesus definitely talked about hell. No, he didn't. Talked about something else. We'll tell you what it was. But the idea of Hades, which means the place of the dead, picked up some very pagan ideas along the way. Okay? Real quick. In 587, Israel was ransacked. Jerusalem was ransacked and destroyed. Very important, by Nebuchadnezzar, and the Babylonians came, and they destroyed Jerusalem, and they wiped out thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and they exported Israel into Babylon, where they lived for 70 years. During that time, the Jews, the Hebrews, were exposed to Babylonian culture and Babylonian religion. The Babylonians had, like the Egyptians, a very intricate system of afterlife theology. And afterlife, where you go when you're dead, Sheol, Hades. So they began to incorporate some Babylonian pagan ideas about the afterlife, which had rivers of fire and lakes of fire and things like that. And they began to incorporate that into their belief system so that by 500 AD, a book called the Babylonian Talmud was put together. The Babylonian Talmud was a collection of writings by Jewish rabbis in Babylon, and in those writings come in ideas that are associated, familiar to the ears of those like Tertullian and Augustine. A place of fire and burning and torture and demons and hideous creatures and being kept alive forever. Those were Babylonian ideas that ended up being filtered into the Hebrew belief system, and they actually were written down in the Babylonian Talmud, and they even appear in the Book of Enoch. Book of Enoch 1 and 2. It's an apocryphal book, was written during that time. Jesus borrowed from some of that imagery in the Lazarus parable, by the way. He was speaking their Babylonian pagan language, but that's a whole different story. But this is real interesting. That collection of writings became known by the first century as the tradition of the elders. Jesus spoke directly against the tradition of the elders. He condemned the tradition of the elders because it was not Hebrew. It was pagan. It was Babylonian. Jesus condemned it. He repudiated it. He renounced it. And he defied it by some of the stuff he did. And he warned them about following the tradition of the elders. Some of that tradition ended up seeping into the first centuries of the Christian church and found its way in Tertullian. Became eternal conscious torment, baptized into the Roman church by Emperor Justinian. Okay? I mean, believe me, you can tell I've done some reading on this. This has been a very, very serious issue of scholarship for me to understand this and to be able to articulate. This is the first time that I've ever sat down and actually taught this. I think it's important to do this. So the other word is Tartarus. We're not even going to talk about that because there's one mention of it in 2 Peter 2:4. Go read it. It has nothing to do with eternal conscious torment. And then the final one is Gehenna. I'm going to leave it right here. I'm going to leave it with Gehenna. I'm going to leave you in Gehenna. I will say this. The word Gehenna is found 12 times in the New Testament. 11 of those times in the Gospels spoken by Jesus. One time by James, talking about the tongue is like a Gehenna. Okay? So 11 times Jesus uses the word Gehenna, but remember, Matthew, Mark, Luke repeat each other. They're synoptic. So they repeat the same story. So of the 11 times that Jesus uses the word Gehenna, represents only 4 actual times the word was spoken out of his mouth. I'm narrowing it down. So this word was spoken by Jesus 4 times recorded in his 3.5-year ministry, and that's the basis upon which people say Jesus was the hellfire preacher, talked about hell more than anything else. 4 times. 4 times. I'm going to close by reading something I wrote about a year ago about Gehenna. I think it's one of the best things I ever wrote, actually.
Yeah, I know you don't read much out of the Bible.
So, and this is introducing and setting up next Sunday's teaching, okay? Contrary to popular religious teaching, see, I actually wrote this in response during a Facebook conversation. Somebody who said Jesus talked about hell more than anything else. So was my response, but then I waxed eloquent. Contrary to popular religious teaching, Jesus never, not one time, ever spoke about hell. That is a fact. The word was not even invented until 725 AD. He did speak very clearly and specifically about Gehenna, or the Valley of Hinnom, a very real place just outside the city walls of Jerusalem, where with a dreaded history where the Jews once sacrificed their children and had them burned alive to the god Moloch. Both Jeremiah and Isaiah referred to this place in their prophecies about the fate of the inhabitants of Jerusalem during the destruction of the city in 587 BC, when the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar laid waste to Jerusalem and threw hundreds of thousands of dead Jews into that cursed valley where they were burned up and consumed by fire. Jesus, in his references to Gehenna, was warning the Jewish leaders of the exact same fate which was going to come upon them within one generation if they did not repent and receive him as their Messiah. And that's what happened. That is exactly what happened. In 70 AD, as chronicled by Josephus in his work, The Jewish Wars, when the Roman general Titus laid siege to the city of Jerusalem and massacred almost the entire population and threw the dead bodies of the Jews into that very same valley of Gehenna where they were consumed by fire and eaten by maggots, worms that die not. Hell is not some future mythological place of eternal torment for people who don't accept Jesus. That is a man-made religious myth used to control and manipulate the masses ever since the dark ages of Roman Catholicism, and has been carried over into evangelical tradition. It should have been renounced and cast out of the belief system of the church, along with the worship of the saints, the infallacy of the Pope, the selling of indulgences, and many other pagan practices that were rejected during the Reformation. Here's my little plug for Reformation 500th anniversary. Unfortunately, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, etc., did not go far enough in the 16th century. It is time to finish the work started during the Reformation and purge the church of the pagan false belief in a place of eternal punishment called hell. So be it.
Amen.
To be continued.
So when he said Gehenna, he said, you might as well be thrown on the trash heap.
Thrown on the trash heap.
Yeah.
That one right over there. You all know where it is. It's right there.
Yeah.
You know, you can almost smell it. You can almost smell it.
Yeah.
So, guys, thank you for tuning in. We're going to YouTube this, and I hope that this will go viral. That'd be awesome. So God bless you. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, well, okay.
Until next time. Bye. Out.
Just think how much love there would be.
How much what?
How much love there would be if hell didn't
If